Trying to explain the entire story of Elden Ring is like trying to explain a dream someone else had while they were reading a philosophy textbook that was on fire. This is a From Software game written in collaboration with George R.R. Martin, which means the story is simultaneously incredibly deep and deliberately obscure, told through item descriptions and environmental details and cryptic NPC dialogue that seems designed to confuse rather than clarify. But here's the thing, there is a coherent story here, a genuine narrative that makes sense if you dig deep enough and connect enough dots and read enough item descriptions and watch enough lore videos and argue with enough people on Reddit about what certain lines of dialogue actually mean. So let's try to untangle this beautiful mess and tell the entire story of Elden Ring from the very beginning, from the Age of the Crucible to your final choice at the game's ending, covering gods and demigods and dragons and outer gods and the shattering and everything in between. This is going to take a while. Before we get into the actual events of the game, we need to understand the cosmology and the major players, because Elden Ring takes place in a world with multiple divine entities and competing cosmic forces, and understanding who they are and what they want is crucial to making sense of anything that happens. The Lands Between, the setting of the game, is a realm that exists under the influence of the Elden Ring, which is simultaneously a physical object, a set of metaphysical laws that govern reality, and the source of power for the demigods who rule this world. The Elden Ring was sent to the Lands Between by the Greater Will, an outer god that represents order and causality, and the idea that reality should follow consistent rules. The Greater Will doesn't directly interact with the world, instead it sends envoys, and the most important of these envoys is the Elden Beast, a living incarnation of the Elden Ring itself that serves as the Greater Will's physical representative in the Lands Between. The Greater Will chose a vessel to contain the Elden Ring and act as its agent in the world, and that vessel was Queen Marika the Eternal, who became a god, or more accurately became the mortal host for the power of the Elden Ring. Marika ruled the Lands Between for an age, establishing the Golden Order, which is the religious and political system based on the principles encoded in the Elden Ring. But Marika wasn't the only god, or the only outer god with interest in the Lands Between. There's the Frenzied Flame, an outer god of chaos and destruction that wants to burn everything down and return the world to primordial oneness. There's the Scarlet Rot god, an outer god of decay and plague that infected millennia. There's the Formless Mother, an outer god of blood and wounds worshipped by Mog. There's the Dark Moon and the Full Moon, which are either outer gods or cosmic forces that grant power to sorcerers. And there's whatever the hell the Deathbirds serve, some kind of death god from before the Golden Order. All of these forces are competing for influence over the Lands Between, and the story of Elden Ring is partly about this cosmic struggle between different visions of what reality should be. Let's start at the actual beginning, before Marika, before the Erd Tree, in the age called the Crucible. The Crucible was a primordial state where all life was mixed together, where distinctions between species weren't clear, where everything was in constant flux and evolution. This was the age of the ancient dragons, massive stone-scaled creatures that wielded red lightning and ruled over the Lands Between from their city of Farum Azula, a massive temple complex that floated in the sky above a perpetual storm. The dragons were led by Dragon Lord Placidusax, who served as Elden Lord to an outer god that has since fled or been defeated, leaving Placidusax waiting eternally in Farum Azula for his god's return. The dragons represented a different order, a different set of natural laws, and their civilization was ancient and powerful. But the Age of Dragons was ending, and the Age of the Erd Tree was beginning. the greater will sent a golden star to the lands between, and from this star came the Elden Beast, and the Elden Beast brought the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring established a new order, new laws of reality, and it needed a vessel to embody these laws in physical form. That vessel was Marika, though we don't know much about who Marika was before she became a god. She was a Numen, a race of long-lived people from outside the lands between, and she was chosen by the Two Fingers, which are agents of the greater will that interpret its wishes and guide its chosen champions. Marika became the vessel for the Elden Ring, ascending to godhood, and she waged war against the dragons to establish the dominance of the Golden Order. She was aided in this war by her first Elden Lord, a man named Godfrey, who was a mighty warrior and the first Tarnished. The war against the dragons was brutal but successful, with the dragons either killed or subjugated, and their lord Placidusax left waiting in the ruins of Fara Mazula for a god that would never return. With the dragons defeated, Marika established the Golden Order and the Age of the Erd Tree. The Erd Tree is this massive golden tree that grows in the centre of the lands between, and it's simultaneously a real physical tree and a metaphysical representation of the power of the Elden Ring. Souls in this world return to the Erd Tree when they die, and worthy souls are eventually reborn, creating this cycle of death and rebirth under the Erd Tree's grace. Marika ruled from the capital city of Leyndell, which was built around the base of the Erd Tree, and she established a feudal system where powerful demigods ruled different regions of the lands between in her name. These demigods were her children, born from her unions with her two consorts, Godfrey and later Radagon. Godfrey was Marika's first consort and the first Elden Lord, a title that means he was the mortal king who ruled alongside the Divine Queen. Godfrey was a warrior of incredible strength, but he was also savage and violent, embodying the martial qualities necessary to conquer and establish the Golden Order through force. Marika and Godfrey had children together, Godwyn the Golden, who was the firstborn and the perfect embodiment of Golden Order virtues, and Morgott and Moog, who were twins born cursed with the Omen affliction, horns and monstrous features that marked them as unacceptable in the Golden Order's vision of perfection. Because of their Omen nature, Morgott and Mog were hidden away in the sewers beneath Leyndell, imprisoned and forgotten, their existence an embarrassment to the Golden Order. After the wars of conquest were complete, after all enemies had been defeated and the Golden Order was secure, Marika did something unexpected and cruel. She stripped Godfrey and his warriors of the grace of the Erd Tree, the divine blessing that gave them power and purpose, and banished them from the lands between. Godfrey became the first Tarnished, wandering the lands outside the lands between with his loyal warriors, all of them stripped of grace and essentially exiled from the realm they'd fought to create. Marika's reasons for this banishment are unclear, but it seems she believed that a warrior without war becomes stagnant, that Godfrey and his people needed struggle and conflict to maintain their strength, and so she sent them away to grow strong in exile, with the understanding or hope that one day they would return. With Godfrey gone, Marika took a new consort, but here's where things get weird. Her second consort was Radagon, a champion with red hair who had proven himself in battles against the Carian royal family, sorcerers who ruled from the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Radagon had married Rennala, the queen of the Carians, and they had children together, Rickard, Radan, and Ranni. But when Marika called him, Radagon abandoned Rennala and returned to Leyndell to become Marika's consort and the second Elden Lord. And here's the thing that the game slowly reveals. Radagon and Marika are the same person. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, but literally the same being. Radagon is Marika, Marika is Radagon, two personalities or identities sharing one divine body. We don't know how this happened or why, whether Marika created Radagon, or they were always one being that could separate into two forms, but this duality is central to understanding everything that happens. Marika and Radagon, or Marika as Radagon, had children together, which is extremely weird when you think about it too hard. Their children were Malenia and Michaela, twins born cursed because they're the products of a single god, reproducing with themselves. Malenia was born afflicted with the scarlet rot, a supernatural plague that slowly consumes her body and threatens to turn her into a goddess of rot herself. Michaela was born cursed with eternal childhood, never aging past a young boy despite being one of the most intelligent and magically powerful beings in the lands between. Both of these curses seem to be the consequence of Marika's self-reproduction, reality itself rejecting this unnatural union. So let's take stock of the demigod family tree because it's confusing as hell. Marika is the god queen, the vessel for the Elden Ring. Her first consort was Godfrey, and they had Godwyn, Morgott and Mog. Her second consort was Radagon, who is also herself, which is deeply weird. Before becoming Marika's consort, Radagon was married to Rennala, and they had Ricard, Radan and Ranni. Then Radagon as Marika had Malenia and Michaela with themselves. All of these children are demigods, possessing divine power and fragments of the Elden Ring called Great Runes, making them essentially immortal and incredibly powerful. These demigods ruled different regions of the lands between, and their relationships with each other and with Marika would ultimately determine the fate of the entire world. The Golden Order, Marika's religious and political system, was built on certain principles encoded in the Elden Ring. One of these principles was the removal of destined death from the world. Death as a natural phenomenon was separated from the Elden Ring and given to Malekith, Marika's half-brother and her loyal shadow, to guard and keep sealed away. With destined death removed from the world, people in the lands between couldn't truly die. When they died, their souls would return to the Erdtree and eventually be reborn. This created a kind of immortality, not in the sense that you couldn't be killed, but in the sense that death wasn't permanent. Your soul would persist and you'd eventually return. This was seen as a blessing, as the ultimate gift of the Golden Order, but it also meant that the natural cycle of death and rebirth was disrupted, that life had no real stakes or meaning when death itself had been removed from reality. The Golden Order also established a strict hierarchy and set of values. It valued gold and light and order and perfection. It rejected things associated with other outer gods, like flame and darkness and blood magic. It had no place for things it considered impure or cursed, like the omens who were born with horns, or the merchants who were suspected of worshipping the frenzied flame and were imprisoned en masse in the sewers. The Golden Order was essentially fascistic in its insistence on purity and perfection, and this would create resentments and rebellions that would eventually contribute to its downfall. Now, we need to talk about Ranni, because Ranni is arguably the most important character in the entire game, beyond the player character and Marika herself. Ranni was Radagon and Rennala's daughter, a demigod, and an incredibly powerful sorcerer. She was also an Empyrean, which is a special category of being that can potentially become a god themselves, a vessel for the Elden Ring or for another outer god's power. Only Empyreans can ascend to godhood, and there were only a few. Marika herself, Malenia, Michaela, and Ranni. Being an Empyrean meant that Ranni was being prepared by the Two Fingers to potentially succeed Marika as the vessel for the Elden Ring, to become the next god and continue the Golden Order into a new age. But Ranni wanted absolutely nothing to do with this plan. Ranni rejected the greater will and the destiny that the Two Fingers had planned for her. She didn't want to be a puppet for an outer god, didn't want to become the next vessel for the Elden Ring. She wanted freedom, for herself and for the world, freedom from the influence of outer gods entirely. So she devised an elaborate plan to free herself from her Empyrean body and from the control of the Two Fingers. She stole a fragment of destined death from Malekith, the rune of death that had been sealed away to prevent true death from existing in the world. On the night that would come to be known as the Night of Black Knives, Ranni orchestrated an assassination. The target was Godwyn the Golden, Marika's firstborn son, the perfect prince who embodied everything the Golden Order valued. Ranni worked with a group of assassins called the Black Knife Assassins, Numen women like Marika herself, who wielded daggers imbued with the rune of death. These daggers could kill in a way that nothing else could inflict true death that would prevent someone from being reborn by the Erd Tree. The Black Knives infiltrated Leyndell and murdered Godwyn, stabbing him with their rune-marked daggers and killing the first demigod to truly die since destined death was removed from the world. But here's the twist. Ranni performed a ritual simultaneously, killing her own body at the exact moment Godwyn died. The rune of death was split between them, with Godwyn dying in soul but not in body, and Ranni dying in body but not in soul. Godwyn's body lived on, but his soul was gone, and his undead corpse became the first of those who live in death, spreading a corruption called Deathroot throughout the lands between. His body was buried beneath the roots of the Erd Tree, where it grew and spread like a cancer, creating Deathroot that animated corpses and created undead monsters. Ranni's body died, but her soul lived on, and she managed to transfer her soul into a doll, a puppet body that she could inhabit, freeing herself from her Empyrean flesh and from the control of the Two Fingers. This was an act of rebellion against the greater will itself, a demigod choosing to die rather than fulfill the destiny that had been chosen for her. The Night of Black Knives was the beginning of the end for the Golden Order. Godwyn's death devastated Marika. He was her firstborn and favourite son, the embodiment of everything she'd worked to build. His death broke something in her, or maybe it catalysed something that had been building for a long time. Shortly after Godwyn's death, Marika did something that would shatter the world itself. She took up her hammer and she shattered the Elden Ring, the physical object, the source of all the power and order in the lands between. She smashed it into pieces. This was an act of rebellion, or despair, or rage. We don't know for sure, but it was the most consequential action anyone had taken since the Golden Order was established. When Marika shattered the Elden Ring, reality itself broke. The laws that governed the world fractured. The demigods, who each held a great rune that was a fragment of the Elden Ring's power, suddenly had pieces of ultimate power without any central authority to hold them in check. And the greater will, furious at this betrayal, punished Marika. Radagon, the other half of Marika's being, tried to repair the Elden Ring, tried to undo what Marika had done, but he failed, or was stopped, and the greater will imprisoned Marika and Radagon both within the Erd Tree, crucifying their shared body and using them as a host for the Elden Beast, trapping them there as both punishment and prison. With Marika imprisoned and the Elden Ring shattered, the demigods went to war. This conflict is called the Shattering, and it was a catastrophic civil war where the children of Marika and Radagon fought each other for supremacy, each trying to claim enough great runes to become powerful enough to become the new Elden Lord and God. The wars of the Shattering destroyed much of the lands between, killed countless people, and left the realm broken and dying. let's go through what happened to each of the major demigods during and after the shattering, because their stories are crucial to understanding the state of the world when you, the player character, arrive. General Radahan, the son of Radagon and Rennala, was one of the mightiest warriors in the lands between. He was famous for learning gravity magic solely so he could continue riding his beloved horse, Leonard, even after he grew too large for any normal horse to carry him. During the shattering, Radan fought Malenia in a battle that would become legendary. They met at Caelid, and their battle was so catastrophic that it devastated the entire region. Neither could overcome the other until Malenia, in desperation, unleashed the scarlet rot that she'd been containing within herself. She bloomed, becoming the flower of Aeonia, and released such a massive concentration of scarlet rot that it turned all of Caelid into a rotting hellscape. Radaeon was infected, the rot slowly eating away at his mind and body, but his strength was so great that he didn't die. Instead, he went mad, reduced to a feral state, wandering the blasted wastes of Caelid and eating the corpses of friend and foe alike, no longer truly alive or dead, but suspended in this horrible state of undeath and insanity. His soldiers stayed loyal even in his madness, holding a festival to honour him and to eventually grant him the warrior's death he deserved. Malenia fell into a coma after unleashing the scarlet rot, and her loyal knight Finlay carried her unconscious body all the way back to Miquella's Haligtree, an incredible feat of loyalty. But Malenia's condition was deteriorating, the rot consuming more of her body, and she sealed herself in the Haligtree waiting for her brother Miquella to wake her, trusting that he would find a way to cure her curse. Miquella was the most brilliant and magically gifted of all the demigods, and he'd been working on creating his own tree, the Haligtree, as an alternative to the Erdtree, a place where those rejected by the Golden Order could find sanctuary. Miquella had researched countless ways to cure his and Malenia's curses, and he'd created unalloyed gold, a special metal that could resist the influence of outer gods and potentially protect against the scarlet rot. But before he could complete his work, something terrible happened. Morg, the twin brother of Morgott, who'd been imprisoned in the sewers for being an omen, had escaped his prison and become obsessed with the formless mother, an outer god of blood. Mog wanted to create his own dynasty, the Mogwyn dynasty, and he needed an Empyrean to serve as his consort god. He learned of Miquella and kidnapped him, stealing Miquella away from the Haligtree and taking him to his underground palace in Mogwyn. There, Mog placed Miquella in a cocoon, sharing his blood with the sleeping demigod, trying to force him to grow to adulthood and ascend to godhood as Mog's consort. Miquella remained asleep in his cocoon, unable to wake or resist while Mog built his bloody dynasty in the depths of the earth. Rykard, another of Radagon and Renala's children, chose a different path. He was lord of Volcano Manor and became obsessed with the idea of devouring the gods themselves. He fed himself to a massive serpent god, allowing himself to be consumed and merged with the serpent, becoming the god-devouring serpent. A massive snake with Rykard's face emerging from its mouth. He established Volcano Manor as a place for tarnished who rejected the Golden Order, sending them out as assassins to hunt other tarnished and anyone allied with the Erdtree. Rykard's goal was to grow powerful enough by devouring warriors and demigods that he could eventually consume the gods themselves and bring down the Golden Order through gluttony and blasphemy. Morgott, the other Omen twin, had a very different reaction to his curse and his imprisonment. Despite being rejected and imprisoned by the Golden Order, despite being considered unworthy because of his Omen nature, Morgott remained fiercely loyal to the Golden Order and to his mother Marika. He took the name Margit to hide his identity and became the defender of Leyndell, fighting off anyone who tried to approach the Erd Tree. He was the last loyal son, the final guardian of the capital, holding the line even as the world crumbled around him. His loyalty is tragic because it's loyalty to a system that rejected him, to a mother who imprisoned him, but he maintained it nonetheless out of a sense of duty and honour. Ranni, having killed her body and transferred her soul into a doll, retreated to her tower in Liurnia and began working on her plan to end the age of the Golden Order and establish a new age, one free from the influence of all outer gods. She gathered followers, including her loyal knight Bled, the war counsellor Iji, and the preceptor Seluvis, and she waited for a tarnished champion who could help her achieve her goals. Godwyn's body, dead in soul but alive in flesh, spread deathroot throughout the lands between, creating those who live in death, undead creatures that should not exist according to the Golden Order's laws. This created a whole new category of being, neither truly alive nor truly dead, and they were considered abominations. A hunter of the dead, Gurranq, spent his time tracking down and consuming deathroot, trying to prevent its spread, but the corruption was too widespread to stop. The shards of the Elden Ring, the great runes, were claimed by various demigods, and possessing one of these great runes gave incredible power, but also seemed to corrupt or drive mad those who held them. Godric the Grafted, a distant descendant of Godfrey who lived in Stormvale Castle, became obsessed with power and began grafting the limbs of defeated warriors onto his own body, creating this hideous spider-like form in a grotesque attempt to make himself worthy of the legacy of his ancestors. Rennala, Radagon's abandoned wife, was driven mad by heartbreak, clutching a great rune he'd left with her and hiding in the academy of Raya Lucaria, trying over and over to rebirth her students perfectly, locked in this loop of obsessive grief. The Shattering Wars eventually reached a kind of stalemate. None of the demigods could overcome the others, and the conflict dragged on, destroying the lands between but not producing a clear victor. And so the lands entered a state of decay and ruin, with monsters and undead overrunning formerly safe areas, with the climate itself becoming more hostile, with the guidance of grace fading as the Erd Tree dimmed and people lost their connection to the divine. The world was dying, and there was no clear path forward, no champion strong enough to restore order or create something new. This is where the player character enters the story. You are Tarnished, one of the descendants of those who were exiled with Godfrey, who lost the grace of the Erd Tree and were banished from the lands between. For generations your people wandered in lands beyond the fog, living and dying without grace, without divine purpose. But at some point, likely when Marika shattered the Elden Ring or perhaps just before, the grace returned to the Tarnished. Dead Tarnished were resurrected, and all Tarnished gained the ability to see sights of grace, golden lights that would guide them back to the lands between and toward the Erd Tree. The Tarnished were called back, summoned to return to the lands that had exiled them, for reasons that weren't clear but that seemed to be part of Marika's plan or the Greater Will's design. You wake up in a chapel at the edge of the lands between, called back to life by grace, and you're greeted by Melina, a mysterious woman who offers you a deal. She will serve as your maiden, giving you the ability to level up and to turn the runes you collect from defeated enemies into power. In exchange, you'll take her to the base of the Erd Tree so she can fulfill her purpose, which she describes as burning the Erd Tree to cinders. This seems insane, burning down the source of all grace and power and life, but Melina is insistent. She was given this purpose by her mother, who she doesn't name but who is clearly Marika, at the foot of the Erd Tree. The terms are simple: you need power and she needs transport, and so you agree. Your stated goal is to become Elden Lord, to gather the great runes from the demigods, to gain access to the Erd Tree, and to repair the Elden Ring, becoming the new ruler of the lands between. This is what the Two Fingers tell you, through their interpreter, that you're meant to kill the demigods, take their power, and restore the Golden Order. The other Tarnished, who were called back, have the same goal, and you meet several of them. Nephili Lu, a warrior who turns out to be descended from Godfrey. Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing, who's been researching the demigods and their weaknesses. Fia, the deathbed companion, who has her own agenda involving those who live in death, and others. Each Tarnished has their own approach and their own ultimate goals, but all are seeking to become Elden Lord in some form. Your journey takes you through the lands between, fighting your way through hostile territories, exploring ruins and castles and underground cities, learning the history of this world through item descriptions and environmental storytelling and cryptic NPC dialogue. You fight Margit the Fell Omen at the gates of Stormvale Castle, not knowing he's actually Morgott in disguise. You defeat Godric the Grafted and claim his great rune. You journey to Lurnia and the Academy of Raya Lucaria, where you defeat Renala and claim her great rune, though you learn that her great rune isn't actually hers, it was left with her by Radagon, and she's just guarding it. You eventually make your way to Leyndell, the royal capital, where you fight Morgott for real, the true battle where he reveals himself as the last defender of the Erd Tree. And when you defeat Morgott, when you prove yourself strong enough to reach the base of the Erd Tree itself, you discover a problem. The Erd Tree is sealed. Thorns block the entrance, and no matter how many great runes you've collected, you cannot pass. Melina tells you there's another way, an ancient, forbidden practice. To burn the Erd Tree, to destroy the thorns blocking entrance, you must kindle the flame of ruin, the fell flame that once burned the Erd Tree before, and that represents the fire of the giants who opposed the Golden Order. This requires you to journey to the mountain tops of the giants, the frozen peaks where the war against the giants was fought. The giants were enemies of the Golden Order, and Marika waged a genocidal war against them, killing all but one. The last giant was kept alive, imprisoned, forced to tend the forge where the flame of ruin was kept. To reach this forge you have to defeat the fire giant, putting him out of his misery and freeing him from his eternal duty. With the giant dead you can access the forge, and here's where you face a crucial choice. Melina offers to sacrifice herself, to serve as kindling for the forge, burning herself to set the Erd Tree aflame. This will accomplish her purpose, what her mother asked of her, but it will kill her. You can accept this, let her burn, and proceed. Or, if you've found the Three Fingers hidden beneath Leyndell, if you've descended into the subterranean shunning grounds and made your way past Mog's projection, and through the frenzied flame prescription, you can take the frenzied flame into yourself. The Three Fingers will burn your body, marking you as a candidate to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, one who will burn down not just the Erd Tree but the entire world, returning everything to the primordial flame of chaos. If you do this, Melina will refuse to accompany you further, horrified by your choice, but you can burn the Erd Tree yourself without her sacrifice. Regardless of how it's done, the burning of the Erd Tree is catastrophic and changes everything. The tree burns, and its burning reveals the truth that the Two Fingers have been lying or mistaken. The Erd Tree isn't actually made of gold and grace. It's a parasitic structure, and burning away its outer layer reveals a massive network of roots and hidden passages. The fire also causes Leyndell to be buried in ash, transforming the capital into Leyndell, capital of ash, a ruined shadow of its former glory covered in grey snow that's actually the burned remains of the Erdtree's outer layers. With the Erdtree burned, the way is open, and you can enter into the tree itself, descending into the depths where Marika is imprisoned. But there's a guardian, and it's the ultimate boss, or rather two ultimate bosses sharing one body. You fight Radagon of the Golden Order, the loyal half of Marika who tried to repair what she broke, and when you defeat him, the Elden Beast emerges, the living embodiment of the Elden Ring itself, the Greater Will's enforcer. This is the final test, fighting God itself, or at least fighting the vassal of an outer god, and if you can defeat the Elden Beast, you gain access to Marika's shattered body and to the shattered Elden Ring. And here's where your choice determines which ending you get, and there are several possibilities depending on what you've done during your journey. The default ending is the Age of Fracture, where you simply repair the Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord, restoring the Golden Order more or less as it was. This is the standard ending if you haven't done any of the elaborate side quests. The Age of Order ending requires you to have helped Goldmask with his research and gotten the Rune of Perfect Order, which lets you repair the Elden Ring in a way that removes the god's ability to meddle, creating a perfect, unchanging order based on pure logic rather than divine whim. The Blessing of Despair ending requires you to have completed the questline with Dung Eater, the reviled criminal whose goal is to curse all life with the Seedbed Curse, ensuring that all future generations will be born cursed and suffering. This is explicitly the worst ending, dooming everyone to misery forever. The Age of the Duskborn ending requires you to complete Fear's quest, defeating Fortisax and claiming the rune of the Death Prince, which lets you create an order where those who live in death are accepted rather than hunted, where Godwyn's undeath isn't seen as an abomination but as a new form of existence. This is a kinder ending than it sounds, giving legitimacy to beings who had been rejected by the Golden Order. The Age of Stars ending is Ranni's ending, and is generally considered the good ending by most players. To get this, you have to complete Ranni's extensive questline, helping her gather the tools she needs to kill her two fingers, finding her hidden doll form, retrieving the Finger Slayer blade from Nokron, defeating Astel to reach the Moonlight Altar, and putting a ring on her finger to become her consort. If you do all this, then after defeating the Elden Beast, you can summon Ranni instead of claiming the Elden Ring yourself. She will spirit away the Elden Ring into the stars, taking the Golden Order with her, and establish an Age of Stars where the lands between are free from the influence of outer gods, where people can live and die naturally without divine interference. It's an ending about freedom rather than order, about rejecting godhood entirely rather than becoming the next god. And finally, there's the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, which requires you to have inherited the Frenzied Flame from the three fingers beneath Leyndell. If you have the Frenzied Flame, then after defeating the Elden Beast, you don't repair anything, you burn it all. You become a vessel for chaos and destruction, melting everything into undifferentiated flame, destroying the entire world and everyone in it, returning reality to the primordial state before distinction and form existed. Melina, if she's still alive, promises to hunt you down and kill you for this choice. It's the apocalypse ending, the end of everything, and it's surprisingly easy to get if you're not careful, because the three fingers don't exactly explain what you're signing up for before they grab you and burn their mark into your flesh. But that's just the surface story, the plot that the game explicitly presents. The actual story of Elden Ring, the one that's told through item descriptions and NPC dialogue and environmental clues and cut content and speculation, is far more complex and ambiguous. Let's talk about what's really going on, the hidden narratives, and the theories that try to make sense of all the contradictions and mysteries. Marika's motivations are central to understanding the whole story, and they're deliberately obscure. Why did she shatter the Elden Ring? The most straightforward interpretation is grief and rage over Godwyn's death, that losing her favourite son broke her and caused her to lash out against the greater will that had failed to protect him. But there's evidence that suggests Marika had been planning rebellion against the greater will for much longer, that Godwyn's death was perhaps the trigger but not the cause. Marika left messages for the player scattered around the world, echoes of things she said or instructions she gave. One of these messages tells someone, presumably one of her children, to aspire to godhood and challenge the Elden Ring. Another suggests she grew to doubt the Golden Order itself, that she came to see it as flawed or unjust. There's a theory that Marika orchestrated the Night of Black Knives herself, that she worked with Ranni to kill Godwyn as part of a larger plan to free the world from the greater will's control. The Black Knife assassins were Numen like Marika, suggesting she had connections to them. Maliketh feels betrayed by Marika, suggesting she had something to do with the theft of the Rune of Death from him. And the fact that the rune was split between Godwyn and Ranni, creating two different kinds of half-death, suggests this was planned rather than coincidental. If this theory is true, then Marika sacrificed her own son, allowed him to be murdered, as part of her plan to rebel against the greater will. She needed someone to steal destined death from Maliketh, and she needed a distraction, a crisis that would give her cover to shatter the Ealing Ring. Godwyn's death accomplished both, and it also prevented him from potentially stopping her or fixing what she broke. The question of why Marika would do this leads to questions about what she learned or experienced that made her turn against the greater will. One possibility involves the Age of Plenty, a period before the current age when the Erd Tree was a different colour and had different properties. There are implications that the Erd Tree once gave abundantly, distributing resources and grace freely, but that something changed. The Erd Tree stopped giving and started taking, drawing souls into itself rather than redistributing them. This change might have horrified Marika, made her realise that the greater will's ultimate plan wasn't benevolent, that the Golden Order was consuming the world, rather than sustaining it. The burning of the Erd Tree reveals that its golden exterior was hiding something darker, perhaps suggesting that what appeared to be a divine tree was actually feeding on the people of the lands between. Another aspect of Marika's story involves her origins and her people, the Numen. We know very little about where Numen come from or why they're significant, but we know they're long-lived and that they came from outside the lands between. There are hints that Marika's path to godhood involved violence and sacrifice, that she did terrible things to achieve her position. The wars of conquest that established the Golden Order weren't just against the dragons and the giants, they were against countless other peoples and cultures that were absorbed or destroyed. Marika led or sanctioned these campaigns, built the Golden Order on the corpses of those who opposed it, or simply stood in the way. Perhaps her eventual rebellion was motivated by guilt or horror at what she'd done and what she'd become, a realization that the system she'd built was fundamentally wrong. The relationship between Marika and Radagon is one of the game's deepest mysteries. They are one being with two identities, but were they always this way? One theory is that Radagon was created by Marika, that she split herself, or was split by the greater will as a means of control. Radagon is absolutely loyal to the Golden Order, while Marika came to rebel against it. and keeping them as one being means that Marika could never fully act against the greater will, because Radagon would always try to stop her. When Marika shattered the Elden Ring, Radagon immediately tried to repair it, and their internal conflict essentially paralysed them, making them easy for the Elden Beast to imprison. This reading suggests that Marika's rebellion was doomed from the start because she was fighting herself as much as she was fighting the greater will. Another theory suggests that Radagon and Marika were originally separate but were merged by the greater will after Radagon became Elden Lord, that the greater will literally fused them together to prevent Marika from acting independently. The secret message, Radagon is Marika, is hidden in a statue and has to be decoded through a specific puzzle, suggesting this truth was deliberately concealed. If they were merged, it raises questions about consent and free will, about whether Radagon willingly became part of Marika or was forced into this union. The tragedy of their relationship is that they seem to genuinely love each other in some way. Radagon left gifts for his children and clearly valued his family, but they're also trapped together in a way that neither can escape. The demigod stories all involve tragedy and corruption, and there's a theme running through all of them about the dangers of ambition and power. Godric grafting limbs onto himself in a desperate attempt to be worthy of his lineage, Rykard feeding himself to a serpent in his desire to devour the gods, Mog kidnapping his half-brother to force him into a blasphemous marriage, Morgott remaining loyal to a system that rejected him. All of these represent different responses to the impossible situation created by the shattering. Each demigod was given immense power through their great runes, but was also corrupted or destroyed by that power. The great runes themselves seem to have a corrupting influence, driving their holders toward extremes and obsession. Ranni's plan is presented as the best path forward by many players, but it's worth examining what her Age of Stars actually means. Ranni wants to remove all outer gods' influence from the lands between, to take the Elden Ring far away where it can't affect the world. She describes this as an order of cold and dark and fear, not exactly a utopian vision. Her age would be one where there's no divine guidance, no guaranteed rebirth, where people are truly alone in the universe. This could be liberating, giving people true free will and agency, or it could be terrifying, leaving them without purpose or protection. Ranni herself admits that this age will be frightening, that people will stumble in the darkness without the light of the Erd Tree to guide them. Her ending is about rejecting certainty and embracing the unknown, and whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective. The Frenzied Flame represents another kind of rejection of the current order, but where Ranni wants to create an age of freedom and possibility, the Frenzied Flame wants to destroy possibility itself. The philosophy of the Frenzied Flame, as explained by Shabriri and Hieta, is that individuation and distinction are the source of suffering. If everything is separate, then beings can hurt each other, can feel isolated and alone, can experience loss and grief. The solution the Frenzy Flame offers is to burn away all distinction, to return everything to a unified chaotic flame where there is no separation and therefore no suffering. It's essentially a nihilistic ending, arguing that existence itself is suffering, and the only solution is to end existence. The Three Fingers present this as merciful, as the only way to truly end pain, but it's mercy through annihilation. The law surrounding the Frenzied Flame involves the persecution of the nomadic merchants, a people who are suspected of heresy and imprisoned en masse in the sewers beneath Lendel. There, in their suffering and despair, they called out to any god who would listen, and the Frenzied Flame answered. Their anguish and rage at their unjust treatment gave birth to or attracted this outer god of chaos, and their suffering became the seed of the world's potential destruction. This connects the frenzied flame ending to the Golden Order's cruelty and injustice, suggesting that the apocalypse is the direct consequence of the Golden Order's persecution of those it deemed impure. If you choose the frenzied flame, you're completing the cycle that the Golden Order started, destroying everything because the system was too broken to save. The underground cities of Nokron, Nokstella, and the nameless Eternal City represent civilizations that existed before or outside the Golden Order. These were cities of the Nox, people who worshipped the dark moon and practiced a form of sorcery based on stars and gravity. The Nox created silver tears, mimics that could take the form of anyone, and they researched ways to kill outer gods, creating the Finger Slayer blade specifically to slay the vassals of the Greater Will. For this blasphemy, the Greater Will sent a falling star to punish them, burying their cities underground and wiping out their civilization. The existence of these cities and their fate shows that the Greater Will has always violently suppressed any attempt to resist or create alternatives to its order. The Nox weren't the first or only civilization destroyed by the Golden Order, just the most prominent example we see in the game. The dragon communion churches and the practice of consuming dragon hearts to gain their power represents another form of heresy against the Golden Order. Dragons are the remnants of the previous age, the age before the Erdtree, and consuming their hearts grants powers associated with the Old Order rather than the New. This is seen as blasphemous, but it's also incredibly effective, suggesting that the Old Order had power that the Golden Order couldn't fully suppress. The ancient dragons like Placidusax and Lanciax and Fortisax possessed intelligence and power that regular dragons lack, and they remember a time before the Erdtree when the world was governed by different laws. The existence of Fair Mazula, the crumbling city floating outside of time, raises questions about what happened to the previous age and its god. Placidusax is waiting for a god that fled or was defeated, and this god's identity is never revealed. Some theories suggest this god was an outer god of lightning and storm, others that it was a primordial force that predated all outer gods. Fara Mazula exists outside of normal time, which is why you can access it through a specific method, and why it appears both ruined and somehow preserved. The city contains Malekith and the rune of destined death, suggesting that even the Golden Order relied on the architecture and power of the previous age, that Marika built her order on top of what came before rather than truly replacing it. The lands. Between's geography tells its own story of conflict and destruction. Caelid is a blasted wasteland of rot because of millennia's battle with Radan. The mountaintops of the giants are frozen and mostly empty because of the genocide Marika committed. Liurnia is dotted with ruins and the corpses of massive creatures because of wars between the Carians and the Golden Order. Even Limgrave, the starting area that seems relatively peaceful, is filled with wandering undead and the camps of soldiers who died in the shattering. The entire world bears the scars of the conflicts that have torn it apart, and there's very little that's untouched or pristine. Even the Erdtree itself, the supposed source of life and grace, is revealed to be a parasite that's consuming the world. The role of the Two Fingers and their relationship to the Greater Will is questionable throughout the game. The Two Fingers claim to speak for the Greater Will, to interpret its wishes and guide chosen champions. But the Two Fingers are also clearly fallible. They can be wrong, they can be killed, and they seem to have their own agenda beyond just serving as messengers. When you burn the Erdtree, the Fingers enter a kind of hibernation to commune with the Greater Will, but they never wake up, suggesting either that the Greater Will has abandoned them or that communication has broken down. The existence of the Three Fingers, the counterpart that serves the frenzied flame, raises questions about whether all fingers are reliable, or if they're all just alien entities with their own goals that may not align with humanity's best interests. Melina's identity and purpose are central mysteries that the game never fully explains. She's clearly connected to Marika, calling her Mother and saying she was given her purpose at the foot of the Erd Tree. She knows things she shouldn't know and appears in places she shouldn't be able to reach. The most common theory is that Melina is the Gloam-eyed Queen, a figure from the past who wielded destined death before Malekith defeated her and sealed it away. Melina's eye, which you can only see in the Frenzied Flame ending, is marked with a gloam or purple colour, supporting this theory. If Melina is the Gloam-eyed Queen, then her desire to burn the Erd Tree makes more sense as a continuation of her ancient opposition to the Golden Order. But if she's supposed to be dead, how is she here? Was she resurrected like the Tarnished? Did Marika resurrect her specifically for this purpose? The game doesn't answer these questions definitively. The Tarnished as a group are interesting because they represent people who were rejected by the Golden Order, but are now being called back to save it or destroy it or transform it. The grace that guides Tarnished is gold, the colour of the Erd Tree and the Golden Order, but it's leading them to burn the Erd Tree and shatter the Order completely. This contradiction suggests that either the Grace has a will of its own separate from the greater will, or that Marika programmed the Grace to guide Tarnished toward her rebellion before she was imprisoned. The sights of grace, the golden lights that guide you, might be Marika's last act of defiance, her way of ensuring that champions would arise to finish what she started. The player character's role in all of this is fascinating because you're essentially a pawn in multiple competing plans. The Greater Will wants you to restore the Elden Ring and continue the Golden Order. Marika, through Melina, wants you to burn the Erd Tree and probably wants you to choose an ending that frees the world from the Greater Will's control. Ranni wants you to help her establish her Age of Stars. The Frenzied Flame wants you to burn everything. Various NPCs have their own agendas and want you to enable their particular endings. You're not really in control of the larger narrative, you're just choosing which of several predetermined outcomes you want to facilitate. The game presents this as freedom, as the player choosing their ending, but it's really about choosing which god or philosophy you'll serve. The theme of cycles and repetition runs throughout the game. This isn't the first time the Elden Ring has been broken and remade. It's not the first age to end. It's not the first Elden Lord or even the first time Tarnished have been called back. The Age of the Erd Tree was preceded by the Age of Dragons, which was probably preceded by other ages we don't know about. The cycle seems to be that an outer god establishes dominance, creates an age based on its principles, that age eventually fails or is overthrown, and a new outer god creates a new age. The Shattering and your quest to become Elden Lord is just the latest iteration of this cycle. Some endings perpetuate the cycle, creating a new age that will eventually fail and be replaced. Other endings, like Ranni's or the Frenzied Flame, attempt to break the cycle entirely, either by removing divine influence completely or by destroying the possibility of future ages. The question the game ultimately asks is whether this cycle can or should be broken, and if so, how? Is it better to continue refining the system, creating better versions of divine order like Goldmask's Perfect Order? Is it better to accept death and undeath as natural states like Fear's Age would? Is it better to curse everything and ensure universal suffering like the Dung Eater wants? Is it better to remove the gods entirely like Ranni's plan? Or is it better to burn it all down and start over, or end it permanently like the Frenzied Flame would? The game doesn't tell you which answer is correct because there probably isn't a correct answer. Each ending represents a different philosophy about what the world should be and who should have power over it. The tragedy of Elden Ring is that there are no good options, only less bad ones. Every ending involves loss and sacrifice. Every path forward requires accepting some form of suffering or injustice. The Golden Order is revealed to be built on genocide and oppression, but dismantling it means chaos and uncertainty. Freedom from the gods sounds appealing, but it also means losing the comfort and structure that divine order provides. Keeping the gods means accepting their tyranny, but removing them means facing an uncertain future without guidance. The game's multiple endings aren't really about giving you a happy resolution. They're about forcing you to choose what kind of world you want to live in, knowing that it will be flawed regardless. The environmental storytelling throughout the game supports this theme of inevitable decay and the cost of power. Every location in the lands between has been touched by conflict and corruption. The walking mausoleums contain the corpses of demigods who died without grace, wandering endlessly. The divine towers are all either ruined or guarded by powerful enemies, suggesting that restoring their great ruins comes at a cost. The legacy dungeons, the major castles and fortresses are filled with evidence of what they once were and what they've become. Stormvale Castle was a mighty fortress, but Godric has turned it into a charnel house for his grafting experiments. The Academy of Raya Lucaria was a centre of learning, but Rennala has sealed herself away in madness. Volcano Manor was a noble house, but Ricard has transformed it into a feeding ground for his serpent. The minor characters you meet along your journey all have their own tragic arcs that mirror the larger themes. Rogier is a tarnished scholar trying to understand those who live in death, but his research infects him with deathroot and he slowly dies. Nephili Lu is a warrior trying to live up to her ancestor Godfrey's legacy, but she's disillusioned by Gideon's cruelty and has to find her own path. Dialos is a noble trying to prove himself as a warrior, but discovers he's not suited for violence and finds meaning in protecting those weaker than himself before dying in their defense. Alexander is a warrior Jar trying to become strong enough to be worthy, and he gets his wish, becoming powerful through absorbing the remains of champions, but the cost is that he's filled with death and eventually must be defeated. These stories are all about people trying to find meaning and purpose in a broken world, and most of them end in tragedy or ambiguous victory. The game's title, Elden Ring, refers to both the object and the cycle. The ring is circular, suggesting eternal return, the same patterns repeating across ages. Breaking the Elden Ring breaks the cycle, but it also breaks reality, showing that you can't escape these patterns without destroying everything. The ambiguity of the game's lore, the fact that so much is left unexplained or open to interpretation, reflects the theme that truth is elusive and that different people will have different understandings of the same events. The scholars and historians within the game can't agree on what happened or why, and neither can the players, which is perhaps the point. The Elden Ring story is ultimately about power, who has it, who wants it, what they're willing to do to get it, and what they do with it once they have it. Marika had ultimate power and used it to build an empire, then turned against it when she realized its true nature or cost. The demigods fought over power and were destroyed or corrupted by it. The outer gods compete for power over reality itself. And you, the player, are seeking power in the form of great runes and eventually godhood, making the same choices these characters made, hoping for a different outcome. The game is skeptical about whether power can be used wisely or justly, about whether any form of divine rule can be benevolent, about whether free will is possible in a world governed by cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. In the end, the story of Elden Ring is less about a coherent narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end, and more about a world and its history, a mythology that you piece together from fragments and echoes. It's a story told through absence and implication as much as through direct statement. The actual plot, becoming Elden Lord and choosing an ending, is almost beside the point. The real story is about understanding what this world is, how it got this way, what forces shaped it, and what your choice of ending means in the context of that history. It's a story about cycles of violence and oppression, about the dangers of divine authority, about the cost of ambition and the impossibility of redemption, about whether it's better to preserve a flawed system or destroy it knowing you might create something worse. And that ambiguity, that refusal to provide clear answers or moral certainty, is what makes Elden Ring's story compelling despite, or perhaps because of its obscurity. You're not just playing through a story, you're excavating one, piecing it together from ruins and relics, forming your own understanding of what happened and what it means. Different players will come away with different interpretations, different judgments about which characters were right or wrong, different choices about which ending best represents their values. The game trusts you to do that work, to think about these questions rather than just following a predetermined narrative. And in that trust, in that willingness to be difficult and obscure and to let meaning emerge from player interpretation rather than authorial decree, Elden Ring creates a story that's richer and more memorable than most games that explain everything explicitly. So that's the entire story of Elden Ring, or at least as much of it as we can understand and explain. A world governed by outer gods and their vassals, a divine queen who rebelled against her masters, demigods who tore each other apart in their quest for power, and a lone tarnished guided by grace to either restore the old order, create a new one, or destroy everything. It's a tragedy without villains, or perhaps a tragedy where everyone is a villain to someone, where noble intentions lead to catastrophic outcomes, and where power corrupts even those who seek it for righteous reasons. It's about the end of an age and the painful birth of whatever comes next, and about the terrible choices we make when every option leads to suffering, and somehow, buried in all that darkness and ambiguity, there's something beautiful and meaningful about this broken world and the people trying to survive in it or save it or burn it all down. That's Elden Ring.